The time of decisions is nigh. Things will be placed into an order that may or may not be acceptable to the viewership, but they will be determined for the entirety of time until I make another video on this subject when another show invariably makes its premiere. Oh god, guys, I'm sorry. I hope you enjoyed that, but just know I do these bits for you, and it really is just me being weird in a room. Like, if an alien watched me do this, they would be like, humanity is f***ing weird. But regardless, yes, today I'm going to be doing one of my most requested ranking videos, and that's going to be ranking every single first season of a Star Trek show. And now that Star Trek Lower Decks has just wrapped up its first season, it's probably about time that I finally make this list. Now, just to say a few things starting off, this ranking is not my listing of these series as a whole. There may be series that are lower on this list that I actually think are the best series in the series, in the franchise, or there might be a series at the top of this list that I actually think are the worst or something like that. I'm just saying that this is just a ranking of the first season of every Star Trek show, not of that show in general, as should be obvious, but I feel like I need to make that clear. Also, this is just my opinion. This does not have to be your opinion. In fact, I am very excited for it not to be your opinion because I want to have a discussion in the comments below, because that's the fun of making ranking videos. We all disagree. We all get to make our own rankings. It's fun to have discussions with people who disagree with you on stuff like Star Trek. It's just a joy. So, with that said, let's jump into the list. All right, right at the bottom of the list, probably to the surprise of no one, is Star Trek: The Next Generation. So I actually have to be honest with all of you. I kind of figured even before making this list that Star Trek: The Next Generation was going to be at the bottom, but I actually just recently finished a rewatch of that first season. Like, quite literally, I finished watching the first season yesterday. And I have to say, despite the fact that I still think it's the worst season, it actually went up very highly, in my opinion, on that recent rewatch. Especially the latter half of the first season of Next Generation, you can definitely see that they're starting to get into the groove and figure things out. Characters are starting to click into place. Worf, Data, Picard, Riker all start showing shades of the characters of who they're going to be. There's also some wonderful, like, little subtle continuity that I almost forgot that Next Generation even attempted to do way back in the 80s. There's like subtle hints towards the build-up towards the episode Conspiracy, where there's like aliens infiltrating Starfleet, and several episodes before that makes reference to that fact.
We had to be very sure of you. Some of us at Starfleet Command became suspicious of certain problems in the Federation.
What kind of problems?
Someone or something is trying to destroy the fabric of everything we've built up in the last 200 years.
There's episodes where we hear that the Enterprise is getting an upgrade, and then several episodes later the holodeck is upgraded. Or we get things like the seeding of even the Borg. The final episode of this season, the Neutral Zone, hints at the Borg, who wouldn't be a thing until season 2 and wouldn't become a big deal until season 3.
Sensors indicate no evidence of conventional attack.
Can you determine what happened?
The outpost was not just destroyed. It's as though some great force just scooped it off the face of the planet.
And also, there's some actually really strong episodes, especially in the latter half. We get episodes like We'll Always Have Paris, or the aforementioned Conspiracy. And I know this might be controversial, but I actually think Shades of Evil is a good episode outside of the fact that Tasha Yar gets kind of treated like a red shirt and killed off with no significance whatsoever. But the episode as it stands is actually not all that bad. So, in all honesty, I really think that Next Generation goes up, in my opinion, as a first season. But the reason it's still at the bottom of this list, though, is that first half of the season, whoo, it is particularly atrocious. Outside of Encounter at Farpoint, which has a few things that I do really love, the first half of this season is just a mess. There are episodes that are trying to be like the original series, but it just plays off as weird, especially because it also brings forth like the weird sexism of that time period. Like, there's a lot of like stuff about women in the first few episodes of this series that are really awkward in hindsight, that like are a little bit more forgivable in the cheesiness of the original series, but in the much more kind of grounded world, the Next Generation feels really awkward and really weird. Also, the early Next Generation is horny as Also, so many episodes are dealing with Wesley Crusher being like, I'm gonna save the ship, but no one's gonna appreciate me. Adults, right? They just don't get us kids.
Engineering has nothing like it on record.
Let's get to the captain.
No, they might be affecting the captain. To Riker.
You're welcome, ladies. Adults.
Haha, I'm Wesley Crusher. Now, I'm not hating on Wesley. He does become a better character. Even towards the end of this season, he's a better character in episodes like Coming of Age, which is a actually fantastic Wesley Crusher episode. Early Wesley Crusher is just honestly frustrating and grating as hell. And it's just really frustrating. He's always saving the ship. The original Star Trek Mary Sue, if you will, outside of the fact that Mary Sue was from fanfic, Star Trek fanfic. But anyways, that's a whole other deal. The other thing that should be mentioned that really makes this bottom of the list is Code of Honor. I will do a whole video talking about Code of Honor one day. I want to do it, but dear God, one of the most vilest, racist, sexist, and worst episodes of Star Trek in general. And that episode right there can take this whole season down. All right, next up on the list is Star Trek Picard. Yes, the most recent live action season that we got, Star Trek Picard, I really have to say is low in my estimation of first seasons. That isn't to say I don't like it. I don't really think I hate any of the Star Trek first seasons at all. But the thing with Star Trek Picard, while I really appreciate a lot of its ambition, I think it's probably one of the most ambitious Star Trek first seasons that we've gotten. It was really trying to do something different and new for Star Trek. But I really have to put it lower on the list because there's just so many things that, looking back on it several months on from it, really just kind of frustrate me that it didn't really pay off in a lot of the ways it should. There's a lot of feeling with this season that it just didn't think out a lot of the stuff that it had set up. Like, there's so many storylines that ultimately go nowhere. Like, the whole Borg Cube storyline, 7 of 9 storyline, stuff with Elnor. While I do like all those ideas, like, I love the Borg Cube idea, I love 7 of 9 idea, I love Elnor idea, like 7 of 9 becoming queen is such a brilliant idea, but they ultimately are kind of meaningless, and they all culminate in this story that feels really over the top and grandiose. Now, I don't want to, like, wash the baby out with the bathwater here. There is a lot of good ideas in Star Trek. I love the sort of deconstruction of Picard as a character and sort of looking at what he means as a character, what his failings are, and extrapolating those failures out. I think episodes like Nepenthe are a really strong, beautiful return to these characters that we knew and loved, with Riker and Troy and Picard himself. I like all the new characters that are introduced in the series. I wish they had been better put to use, but I like all of them. I like every single new character that we get to meet in this series, and I'm really excited for where they may go in Season 2. So this season showed me that Season 2 of Picard could be really, really strong, and it definitely has a good foundation, but ultimately this season is still a bit disappointing. Alright, next up on the list is Star Trek, the animated series. This is actually a little bit of a weird one to try and qualify because, unlike all the other Star Trek shows, the first season of Star Trek the Animated Series is essentially the entire series of Star Trek the Animated Series, except for 6 episodes. Literally, there are only 6 episodes in the animated series' second season. So ultimately, I'm just ranking the animated series against everything else outside of Season 2. And Season 2 is all pretty much the same, except for one episode, the counterclock incident, which was really solid. But the rest are all kind of flat. And that's really what I can say about most of Star Trek the Animated Series. There's a lot of fun stuff to be had in here. Like, there's like a campy, weird, like over-the-top joy and like strangeness to the animated series that you can just really dig into.
Behold, gentlemen, the dawning of a new era, the salvation of a galaxy. Spark 2.
And also, there's a lot of like fun stuff that is done in this season that really can only be done in animation. Like, there's some really cool designs and like new crew members like Arex that gets introduced in this season, and Maress gets introduced in this season. But a lot of that stuff was just done better on Lower Decks later on. Like, this sort of only can be done in animated form kind of Star Trek. That also being said, there are some brilliant episodes in this season as well, Yesteryear being a particular highlight. If you don't watch any episode of Star Trek the Animated Series, at least watch Yesteryear. It is a true joy and delight, and probably the best thing DC Fontana ever wrote for Star Trek, and that is saying something considering that DC Fontana was such a great contributor to early Star Trek up to the Next Generation. So Yesteryear, well worth your time. But the rest of Star Trek, while it has, the animated series has its charm, and you can definitely have a lot of fun with it, it is also a little bit like flat, kind of dated in terms of its reused animation style and canned songs and music just over and over and over and over again reused. Good, but definitely really doesn't transcend anything at any point other than in Yesteryear. Alright, the next first season we're going to be talking about is one that probably a lot of you forgot, and that is Star Trek Short Treks. So the first season of Short Treks are really the first 4 episodes of it, which includes the episodes Runaway, Calypso, I forget the name of it, but the one with Saru, and then the one with Harry Mudd, the final one. And so this one's a little bit weird to rank because there's only 4 episodes and you could watch them all in about 30 minutes. And I will say 2 of these episodes, the Harry Mudd one and Calypso, I think are truly fantastic works of Star Trek. Calypso, I think, is one of the most artistic expressions that Star Trek has ever done that really just tells the story really beautifully and evocatively. And the Harry Mudd episode, which was directed and written by Mike McMahon, who would later go on to write Lower Decks, it's such a statement of purpose for what Lower Decks would become, this sort of like irreverence but still love and joy within the Star Trek universe, breaking structure, doing new different things within a Star Trek story, which what a short trek kind of promised to do, to tell these weird offshoot kind of outside the box Star Trek stories. So I really appreciate both Calypso and the Harry Mudd episode doing that with the short trek format. The Runaway episode and the Saru episode, however, while not bad, Runaway I have a little less estimation of, but there is still stuff to like there. They really feel like just like deleted scenes from Star Trek Discovery Season 2. In fact, a lot of the stuff that are in those episodes really are just kind of set up for stuff for Star Trek Discovery Season 2. And while they do kind of tell their own interesting story in and of themselves, they really just feel like they're there to set up stuff that the writers for Star Trek Discovery Season 2 didn't have the time to set up within the actual show itself. And so just feel like more like deleted scenes and not really full things in of themselves, and don't really pay off the idea of what a short trek is in the way that I wanted to, and the way that Season 2 of short treks really did a much better job of, outside of the Children of Mars Star Trek Picard short trek, which also felt like kind of a deleted scene and set up for Picard. I like the concept of short treks. I think Season 2 did a little bit better, but Season 1 of Star Trek short treks, I think, is 50% paying off great things and 50% just deleted scenes that probably should have been in the actual show proper. All right, next up is Star Trek Voyager. So here's where we get to the sort of middle of the pack Star Trek seasons. And the thing that I say about this season of Voyager and probably the next few seasons is that they're all just fairly standard. With Voyager, Star Trek had kind of gotten into a groove, especially when a lot of the writers from Voyager were just carrying over to Next Generation, and especially early Voyager really feels like it's just Next Generation Light, or Next Generation 2.0, where it's really just trying to do the same things with a little bit of a remix in there, and everything as a result kind of feels very bland. There were a few things that were risky here, like setting it in the Delta Quadrant and just doing stuff with it being a half a Maquis crew, but ultimately that's all just dismissed in favor of doing that Next Generation 2.0 feel. And again, just makes it feel very bland. It's not bad. I don't think there's anything out and out horrible like early Star Trek The Next Generation had in Star Trek Voyager Season 1, but it really just all is like, yeah, that was an episode, I guess. I liked it. It was fine. The only real standout in Voyager Season 1 is the EMH hologram. Is really, the Doctor was such a really brilliant standout character, and Catherine Janeway herself was a really standout captain as well. And all the rest, while I do love where Tuvok goes and a few other characters as well, Tom Paris and B'Elanna being particular highlights, ultimately the rest of them in this season feel very blah. And not bad, just blah, which is ultimately way more uninteresting to me than even something like Next Generation Season 1, which I think is worse, but way more interesting. Speaking of could have been much more interesting, but ultimately kind of blah seasons, next up is Star Trek Enterprise Season 1. All of you know I am a huge fan of Star Trek Enterprise, especially where it goes in seasons 3 and 4. But Star Trek Enterprise kind of suffers from a very similar problem that Voyager does, is that it is very much trying to evoke that Next Generation kind of feel. There's a lot of like, there's this episode where they meet the alien race or whatever, and the blah thing happens. It's all a little bit blah. What I will give Enterprise Season 1 a little bit more of a step up on Voyager is it does pay off a little bit more of its concept a little bit better than Voyager does. Voyager ultimately just discarded the fact that it was in the Delta Quadrant in terms of like feel and just became like another let's explore whatever things. But Enterprise Season 1, at the very least, trying to at least do a few things that were like, oh, this is the first time that the humanity of this era gets to do this thing. The first time that they get to go and visit a new planet and set foot on. The first time they get to go and visit a colonist, having to deal with like some political situations that are a bit outside of humanity's experience. So I liked all of those episodes. Also, unlike Voyager, there are some really standout episodes within here too, like Shuttle Pod 1, or the Andorian Incident, or Shockwave Part 1. Part 2 wasn't as good, but Part 1 was a really solid episode. Even Broken Bow, the first episode of Star Trek Enterprise, was a really fantastic setup for the series. So there are some standout episodes, some really memorable episodes, but most of them are fairly bland, while at least having a sparkling of uniqueness to them because of the setting of Star Trek Enterprise, but overall just kind of feels very samey for like trying to redo what Voyager and Next Generation had already done before. And next up on this list, this is sort of the last of the very kind of blah identity crisis-y kind of shows, and that is Deep Space Nine Season 1. Deep Space Nine, again, falls into the same thing where it was trying to figure itself out and ended up feeling in a lot of ways for its first season like it was trying to redo the Next Generation. There's a lot of episodes that are just like, here's the thing of the week, here's this alien that pops onto here, here's this like weird moral conundrum, and it all feels kind of blah. We even get character guest stars like Q and Vosh from the Next Generation coming into Deep Space Nine and kind of doing their sort of shtick from the Next Generation, just slightly less interestingly because the crew didn't really feel fully their own yet. But the reason that I put Deep Space Nine at the height of these sort of identity crisis seasons, I put like Voyager, Enterprise, Deep Space Nine, their first seasons were all sort of evocative of the Next Generation and really hadn't found their own voice. But out of all three of those, Deep Space Nine was the one that I think had the most kernels of what it eventually would become in its first season. And that is no more exemplified than the episode Duet, which I think is probably, in my opinion, the strongest episode of any Star Trek first season. That's including ones that come later on this list. Duet, I think, is a true standout episode that ranks among some of the best Star Trek episodes of all time, and really actually dug into really meaty issues that only could have been told on Deep Space Nine, a show where they're boldly going nowhere, just staying in one spot, have to sit in these political and social issues that come up because of Bajor and Cardassia and really speak to larger issues. Instead of Next Generation, where it got to warp on and go to the next big thing, Deep Space Nine had to sit in it, and Duet exemplifies that. And there are also little other episodes throughout the season that kind of sprinkle that in, where we get to see like things being dragged along and things returning and coming up that would get brought up in later seasons, like Kai Wynn and things like that. So I think while Deep Space Nine was still also figuring out its identity within its first season, I definitely think that it had the most legwork done in its first season as compared to the other shows. All right, next up on the list, and the one that probably will be the most controversial considering that it ranks so highly on this list, and I know I'm a bit of an apologist for this season of this show, and that is Star Trek Discovery Season 1. Yes, for a lot of people, Star Trek Discovery Season 1 is typically a you love it or you really, 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 really hate it. And I'm going to set aside the sort of vitriolic response to that. There are people who do legitimately have a lot of concerns with Discovery. And if you personally rank Discovery Season 1 lower on your list, I actually 100% understand that. This season is messy. It is a very messy season. It kind of loses its thread at one point to like go off in the mirror universe and then comes back, and then like the Klingon war gets wrapped up really quickly. The arcs of the characters are a little bit uneven. Characterizations, especially towards the beginning, are a little bit off. It's a little bit too grimdark towards the beginning, even though I liked that idea of going from the darkness and needing redemption to how that like symbolic, like how do we earn redemption when we fail, and how do we earn this idea of being the Federation that we want to be, being the Starfleet that we want to be. I like that concept, but it sometimes goes a little bit off track and a little bit too dark towards the beginning. So I understand that this season is very, 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 very messy. But I also am someone, and I mentioned this earlier, I am someone who really appreciates the ambitious failure over the more like standard solid thing. I will take a more ambitious thing over something that's just, it was good, but didn't do anything surprising or unique. And I really think that Star Trek Discovery took a really big swing, and oftentimes it whiffed that swing, but other times it connected really strongly. I think all of the characters in this season, eventually when we get to by the end of the season, are really, really great. As I said, I really love that concept of moving from we needing redemption to earning what Starfleet and the Federation is all about. That was sort of the theme of the season. I am someone who liked the trip to the Mirror Universe. I liked the reveal of Lorca being this Mirror Universe guy. I do think he was a little bit too evil when he did turn out to be a Mirror Universe guy, and I wish he had been a little bit more nuanced in his portrayal post that. But I did like his portrayal pre coming out as sort of the villain Mirror Universe character. I also, like I said, I just appreciate a lot of the swings that Discovery went for, and sometimes they connect, sometimes they didn't, but that is way more interesting for me as a viewer than to just get the same thing over and over and over again, like Voyager and early Enterprise and Deep Space Nine kind of were. All right, second from the top, my number 2 Star Trek first season is Star Trek Lower Decks. Now, I understand that this may be a little bit of recency bias for me. I mean, I just literally finished watching Star Trek Lower Decks about a week ago, less than that actually, but I think especially for me, Lower Decks was such a joy, a treat, a love letter to Star Trek fans. It really felt like it was letting us laugh at Star Trek as a whole, making fun of and poking at the tropes and mistakes and foibles of the series, but also setting up what we all love about it and actually getting to do some things with the series and franchise that a lot of us have always wanted. Spoilers, I skip ahead like 30 seconds here, but we actually got to see like the Titan show up in the final episode of the series, something that we had all been wanting as Trek fans for a very, very, very long time. I also think that the characters in Star Trek Lower Decks and the characterizations and the stories were all incredibly solid and confidently done. This show knew what it wanted to be from its first episode and got better as it went along, but you could see what this show wanted to be from its very first episode, and it delivered on that. There was none of this wishy-washy kind of identity crisis that pretty much every other Star Trek show had, where it was still trying to figure things out. Like, Lower Decks in 10 episodes gave us exactly what it intended to set out to give us. The only negative really that I'll put on Star Trek Lower Decks is that while I certainly think its batting average is the highest of any Star Trek first season, like every single episode, there's not a bad episode in the first season of Star Trek Lower Decks at all. But I also don't think that there is anyone that is truly elevating. There are ones that I really love, like Crisis Point and the season finale as well, No Small Parts, are really fantastic episodes, but I think they're a little bit also good on the back of previous Star Treks because they're evoking all these other things and sort of making fun of and pointing at all these things. And while I think there are a lot of kernels of good things in here, like what the storyline is with Boimler and Mariner as characters, I do think that the show still has a little bit of work to do. Not a ton, but a little bit of work to do in finding its own footing. And I think that that is going to happen because so much of the first season was referential to previous seasons, and I think now that Star Trek Lower Decks has had a whole season to build out its own canon and its own history and its own characters and world, it's going to be able to start referencing itself and building out its own jokes and running gags and running themes and ideas and character arcs rather than relying on previous Star Trek shows to get those jokes out. It's very much going to be able to be more self-referential and deal with it itself than having to be reliant on other Star Trek shows. So I think that's really the only knock against it that I have, but I still think that this is one of the most rock solid, in fact, it is the most rock solid Star Trek first season ever done. But there is one more that I would place above Star Trek Lower Decks, and that is the one, the only Star Trek the Original Series. Unlike Lower Decks, I do not think that Star Trek the Original Series first season was all hits. There are some really sort of rough patches, especially in early Star Trek the Original Series, namely episodes like Charlie X, for example, which were just really campy, weird episodes. And there were also some episodes where we were still finding out the characters, like Leonard Nimoy took a little bit of time to figure out exactly how he wanted to portray Spock. But when things finally all click together in this season, especially towards the end of the season, they are transcendent. There are some really classic, memorable, and maybe a little bit of this is just nostalgia coloring this, but episodes like City on the Edge of Forever and Balance of Terror are still meaningful today, all these years later, and say something about humanity today, all these years later. And in some ways that's kind of sad that we haven't evolved beyond a lot of the issues that Star Trek was really pointing at. The very fact that those stories are in a way timeless speaks to how thoughtful the writers on the original series really, really were, and how smart this idea of Star Trek in general really was, that it can kind of push away some of the more prescient stuff to focus in on the actual human emotions and ideology and sort of the baser things going on there. And don't get me wrong, I think Star Trek saying prescient things should and can happen, and even the original series did that quite often as well, and I think it should do that. I think it should speak directly to what we need today, but I also think there's a timeless quality about this season that I think really makes it a real gem of a first season of Star Trek, and has what made the franchise so endearing and so long-lived. And that all comes down to, I think, a lot of the stuff that was established in this first season of Star Trek, the original series. So that is my ranking for all of the first seasons of Star Trek. I know many of you are probably going to disagree with me a lot and heavily, so I'd love to hear all of your anger and vitriol and hate towards my list down in the comments. No, I really expect everyone to have just wonderful and thoughtful and really meaningful conversations, so I highly encourage that, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts. So let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to more of this channel for more discussions of Star Trek Discovery. I have all those reviews, all of Star Trek in general, discussions of social and political issues throughout geek topics and Star Trek, all that's on this channel. I also have a Patreon. I have a big move coming up very, very soon where I'm moving to Seattle, so Patreon is really going to help pay the bills when it comes to that. So if you can help me out over there, it is very much appreciated. But beyond commenting, subscribing, and helping out on Patreon, I just hope that you are doing okay, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. A huge thank you to my amazing patrons who make this channel happen, and an extra special thank you to Miranda Janelle, Ashley Allen Bokikio, Eli Berg-Moss, Ashlyn Solstice, Christina Dalliance, Greg Gillum, Stephen Kleinard, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wellington Marcus, Wayne Twitchell, Buttoneer, Ish the Mad, Munir Amlani, John Steele, Gavin Robinson, William Stewart, Michael Beam, Spock TOS, BBD, Nathan Olson, The Sir Spence, Zach Cody, Bree Beecher, Maeve, Chloe Dollar, Subraxis, Wen Dizzle Bizzle, Tanya Trummer, Gretchen Badger, Dante St. James, Polly Mina, Piston Twisted Garage, Mark the Edge, and Din. I could not do this without all of you, so thank you so much, especially this month.